So for today, we will be talking about chapter 17 of the Count of Monte Cristo. Title of the topic today is The Importance of Education. Now, a quick summary before we continue so that everybody's on the same page. On our last video, we left off at when Edmond refound his courage and hope because he overheard the sound of digging from his fellow prisoner. And in his endeavor to try to meet the prisoner and he's digging through the hole in the wall, he has actually finally met his fellow escapee, which is a old man by the name of the Abbe Faria. We left off with the Abbe Faria seemingly intriguing Edmond, like he is this kind of mystical, almost unfathomable character. Now, in chapter 17, Edmond follows the Abbe into his room. Sorry, his cell. He's a prisoner. There's no such thing as rooms when you're a prisoner. So, there, the Abbe demonstrated something very, very important to Edmond's character, and it contributes heavily towards his development in both in the story and also translates it very, very well into allowing us, the readers, to understand the importance of knowledge and education, hence the title of the topic for today. So, what does the Abbe Faria show us about knowledge? He demonstrated it actually quite, in a somewhat dramatic way through Dumas' way of writing, where he could tell the time by just looking at the sun's movement and where the sunlight strikes on a particular part of the wall in his cell. And Edmond was extremely surprised. Edmond asked him how did he know, and the Abbe explains to him because the sun moves in a particular way and the earth moves in a particular way. Through the understanding of this celestial mechanics, he can tell the time. And Edmond just looked at him like he was some kind of alien from the outer planet because he was never really educated in this. His knowledge and understanding of how the world works and his resourcefulness really takes a physical form through his inventions and what he has managed to do when he was in captivity in the Chateau d'If. Now, I didn't write it down here, but to him his crowning achievement was his thesis, which he wrote on his t-shirt. Not that he doesn't have t-shirts during that time, but shirts. He wrote his thesis on the shirts that he has, and through a chemical process, he made it so that it's easier for him to write on it as if he's writing on parchment. And this is actually a reoccurring theme throughout the whole chapter, as long as we are staying within chapter 17, which is that the Abbe Faria uses his mind to overcome many, many limitations that has been imposed upon him because he was trapped in the Chateau d'If. So, the one line that he says that really encapsulates the whole idea of the chapter, and even for the title of the topic, is God has supplied man with intelligence to overcome their natural conditions. This is extremely profound and is perhaps sometimes even very obvious when it's spoken out loud, which is that the reason why human beings are at where we are, top of the food chain and everything, is simply because we are able to use our intelligence to overcome every obstacle that has come to us in nature. If it's dark, we create light. If we need to hunt, we create tools. Almost no other creature or species out there on the planet has been able to do that. So the Abbe Faria is basically telling Edmond, right, there will always be limitations, but you can use your mind to overcome those limitations. And that allows you to actually, in a way, kind of be extremely resourceful. So he makes use of whatever that he can have or whatever he can get. The example he gave in the story was that he needed pen, so he used the bones of fish to make the pen. If he needed ink, he mixed it with wine and ash. As a matter of fact, he even mentioned that he will occasionally write with his own blood if he has to. Because he mentioned that if he needs to take very swift notes, he will just use his own blood. So he embodies the proverb which is necessity is the mother of all invention, which is actually very interesting because he actually mentioned something after he showed Edmond some of his creations in a way, and Edmond remarked to him and say that, "Wow, you have such a brilliant mind. Imagine what happens if you're not actually trapped in this prison." And the abbe was extremely honest and said to him, "If I'm not trapped in this prison, I wouldn't be doing half of the things I'm doing right now." He The line in the story was that the overflow of my brain, which is that how his brain is working and acting and thinking, would have evaporated if he was free, because he said that if he had his freedom, he would not be able to do all these things because he's free. His mind will probably doing something else. He will be thinking about something else, and this is actually really, really key for people to understand, and mainly for students at least, which is that it is not so much of how smart you are, and it's also not so much about where you are. It's a combination of both of the factors. You need to be in a kind of precise place and time, and you also need to have like the right kind of attitude and your talent. And this combines allows you to do great things and allows you to do things that you never have expected you be able to do. And that's partially why Edmond so in was so I was about to say insecure, but that's not actually the right word. It's more like he was just overwhelmed by how this man, an old man, older than him, as I mentioned in the video previously, is able to accomplish so much while he couldn't accomplish any of these things at all. So the Abbe Ferrer does a very good job as a character itself, show us that if you have the will to do something, there's always a way to do it, right? Now, what I find most interesting and I find the most practical use of this chapter is how the Abbe kind of outwardly demonstrates the use. How do you actually use knowledge, and what does it actually mean to have knowledge? The contemporary idea of having knowledge is to study or to read a book, but they are all such abstract concepts. They don't really. What does it actually mean when we say to study? What does it mean to have knowledge? What does it mean to know? What is it for? What's the purpose? And in the book itself, at least, it demonstrates this through Edmond's need and desire to understand how he ended up where he ended up. How is it that he's still in prison, and why is he in his current predicament? So, Edmond, as he was talking to the Father Faria, kind of suddenly realized that actually, if this guy is so clever, perhaps he can help me solve my mysteries, right? Now, the Abbot was quite surprised that Edmond didn't quite know why he was there. Now, as the reader, like as us as the readers, we know Edmond actually did not know why he was there. But what he meant, I think, when he said that was that he would have thought that Edmond would have at least figured it out in a way. He would have at least understood that, oh, okay, I'm in this situation right now because of something, because of this thing. It was very evident to the Abbe that Edmond did not know at all. So the Abbe attempts to, and he succeeds in doing this, to decipher this mystery for Edmond. He attempts to explain to Edmond why he's in the position that he is in. Now, the first question, which I really like the first three lines, which started off with, which was that the Abbe basically asked Edmond, "Do you know why you're here? Who do you know anyone? Do you have any enemies? Do you have anybody who wants to do this to you?" And Edmond said, "No, I'm relatively unknown. I'm harmless." There's a line that he says, which I did not put it onto the slide, but he says that reply is neither logical nor wise. It demonstrates that you do not understand the basic fundamental principles of how people work and how the world works. which is very apt in I don't want to say the current situation, but in at least for most younger people, which is that you have to understand that you must understand people. You cannot look at people through a set of rose-tinted glasses. I mean, you can. That's why we have people who are extremely optimistic, or the people who see the good in people. But that does not mean that you must turn a blind eye or even be ignorant about the fact that everybody has their own agendas and everybody has something that they want. So the Abbé kind of used um like a rule sort of to tell you. In philosophy, they call it a maxim, which is almost the same meaning as a rule. I'm oversimplifying it there. I'm sorry. If you want to find out who is responsible for something, discover who benefits from an outcome. Anyone who has watched any crime series, drama, whatsoever, this is what we call who gets the benefit, right? If something happened, the outcome is usually bad, right? But there's always someone who benefits from it. Who is it? They are the ones that you want to go after first. Now, the Abbe Ferreira conceptualizes Edmond's ignorance in a very simple way, which I think, like I said, it's extremely beneficial as well. Everything is relative. You might think that you are relatively insignificant, but there are people around who might see you as either an inspiration or, in this context, in this situation, an obstacle. Everyone has their place in the social ladder. He conjures two examples. One, which is a low-level employee has something to gain if his superior loses their job. If the prince of a country wants to be king, his father has to die. So if the father dies under mysterious circumstance, it is relatively natural for us to suspect the prince. Everybody has their own position in social ladder. Everybody has something to gain when something goes wrong. Now, doesn't mean that when something goes wrong, it's entirely someone else's fault, but if you suspect foul play, it is a very good logic to follow. The one striking thing that I think is extremely important for us to actually understand as well, which is that paying attention matters. Now, of course, again, I know it's a story. Dumas wrote it in a way where Edmond has suddenly crystal clear memory of whatever the heck he saw that day. But the closest approximation that this can apply for us is that we are always meant to pay attention to things. Now, not always, because your brain will just be overloaded and fried. But the moment you understand that we ought to be cautious and wary about the people around us, you start paying attention to things that you never ought to pay attention before. So in the story, Edmond begins to remember, when I was talking to Captain Leclerc, oh, the door was actually open. Oh, Danglars walked past the door. He starts noticing and realizing the significance of the details that are there, that he kind of either dismisses it as unimportant, or he didn't even know it was important in the first place. So paying attention matters. Through paying attention, we can gain access to information and data that helps us do or in this situation helps Edmond do analysis, and if we are to apply it on ourselves, it allows us to also do our own analysis, to think about why would an individual do this? Why would this happen? Who could possibly be responsible for this? These are all done, and they're more efficient if you can get the information necessary, and from there you can kind of extrapolate the results from there. Now, here's where the book kind of crosses a reference over to one of my older videos where I talk about chapter 3 and 4 of the book, where Danglars, Fernand, and Caderousse are involved. So the Abbé very cleanly and clearly separates all the situations are for Edmond. So he starts talking about Danglars first. What's there to be gained for Danglars? Now, Edmond kind of goes like, I don't know what he has to gain. And again, because the Abbé has mentioned before, there is always something to gain from someone, Edmond begins then to realize that through the information he has, by understanding that Danglars the only one who's on board the ship, Danglars the only one who knew what's going on, Danglars the one that actually is the one responsible for what's going on. So he now has his first real. I was thinking of the word victim for some reason, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for. He now knows the first person who's responsible for his imprisonment. Now, what about the letter, right? So, what about Fernand then? Now, the way that Abbe Faria arrived at Fernand when he was breaking down the Edmond's problems with him was he started with his career, which enabled him to arrive at the conclusion with arrive at the conclusion which is Danglars actually the one who was responsible. And when he moved into his marriage or his attachment to Mercedes, we then realize that the angle shifts away from career into something else. And this is very interesting as well, which is that how the Abbott compartmentalizes information and breaks them down separately. This is basically what analysis means. This is basically what critical thinking means, to be able to understand that different things have different place and have their own place, their own criteria. And this is how Edmond actually realizes that Fernand is not as innocent is not the right word here, not as guilt-free. Well, that's the same meaning as innocent, but you get the idea. Not as guilt-free as he thought. So, but he knows, right, that Fernand is not the one with the information. He knows that Fernand does not have the information. So Fernand has to be responsible for something. He just don't quite know what it is. But at this point in the story, right, we begin to see as the reader that Edmond begins to learn how to use his mind, how to understand, even if information given to you doesn't give you the answer you're looking for, it does not mean that it's completely useless. By factoring in Fernand, he learns that with almost certainty, it is Danglars who is the one who sold him out with the information. Now, because Fernand's role, he knows that he knows Fernand's jealous, he knows so he might suspect that Fernand has something to do with it, but he just doesn't really know if he has anything to do with it yet, right? But the next thing that's most important for him was that why? Why was it that when he went to Villefort, why was it that he was still in prison for so long? Now, I love this part because it it allowed Villefort's character. I mean, the whole purpose of Villefort's character in the story is to represent self-interest and, in a way, corruption. So the abbé actually remarked when he was asking Edmond to tell him about Villefort, and Edmond described him as a 27 to 28-year-old man. The abbé actually said that he was young enough to be ambitious, but not old enough to be corrupt. Personally, I will argue that he was already corrupt the moment he decided to send Edmond to jail instead of prosecuting his own father. Now, he seemed overwhelmed by my misfortune, and the abbé asked, "Are you sure it was your misfortune that he felt?" Now, this is something that's very, very interesting because it calls to question and calls to our attention, which is be very cautious of the people who feel sympathy for you, because it allows you to actually then start to begin to think, is the person feeling sympathetic for me because they want to be sympathetic to me, or they have something to gain and they're just putting it as an act? And that's the important part. That's the part that he that's the part that's what the abbé was trying to get to when he was saying that to Edmond. Are you sure he felt that way because of your misfortune, not because of something else? Now, of course, naturally we know, and he eventually finds out that, oh, it's definitely not for Edmond, right? But then again, to be fair to Villefort, we do know that he kind of did go like, this is kind of nonsensical. I don't even know what you're doing here. You're obviously not at fault. It's only when he found out that his father is involved where everything turns around his head, right? And here is where where Villefort's realization now is known to Edmond, right? So Edmond told the abbé, oh yeah, he was feeling so bad for me that he's willing to burn the document. Now, Notice what the Abbé says. The Abbé did not say, "Oh, is it the letter that was incriminating you?" Because you see, to the Abbé, if he wants to help you, you will burn the the denunciation letter that was written by Danglars with his left hand, and that's the end of that, right? But Edmond then say, "Oh, no, it was the other letter, the letter that was like supposed to be that was supposed to be directed to Villefort's father." And the Abbé immediately said, "That man may be a deeper villain than you imagine." And this kind of shocked Edmond. And Edmond, as you can see Edmond goes like, "You're frightening me. Is the world full of tigers and crocodiles then?" Um, this is very, very interesting as well, which because it shows you that Edmond actually was still growing. So this is something that I would suspect that a majority of youths probably don't even realize this, or they know this, they just choose to ignore it. That is that there are people out there in the world who are predatory. Hence the use of the word tigers and crocodiles, right? And I love what the Abbé Faria did, which is yes, except that these tigers and crocodiles are with two legs are more dangerous than the rest. So the Abbé is basically indirectly telling him that yes, the world's a big and dangerous place. There are people out there who will take advantage of you, and they are far more dangerous than you think. So this is partly the reason why I love this chapter so much, because and it kind of leads into the next thing which I was going to talk about, which is that Edmond's learning actually is extremely practical in a way, where because he actually understands the world through his learning, he actually understands and realizes that it is not as black and white, it is not as clear cut as he thought it was. That there were people that it is fraught with danger, and there are always, to in a simplistic way to put it, people out there who are out to get you, not get you, but to take advantage of you. So I love this because it really highlights what actual education is in this situation, and the Abbé probably did more for him than he has done in his past 19 years of his life. Now, knowledge changed Edmond quite dramatically. Um, there's a line that I think I deleted it accidentally, but I wrote it, which was that the moment Edmond learned that Villefort was actually his the one who caused him to be stuck in the Chateau d'If, and he was protecting his father, which is not Nautier. That knowledge seemed to have corrupted him in a sense, which is that Edmond then desires vengeance. He wants to take revenge on the people who have caused him to suffer so. As a matter of fact, in the book, I actually even mentioned this as well when the Abbé sees him again after that. Because when Edmond realizes that, oh my goodness, Villefort was the reason why I was stuck here, he went back to his own cell to reflect upon it. And it was during that time of reflection where Edmond vows to take vengeance on the people who caused him so much pain and harm, which is Villefort, Danglars, and Fernand. And when the Abbe Faria saw him again after he had this conviction, he said to him, "I regretted telling you that, because now if I have indirectly given you the idea of vengeance," which is actually a very interesting topic and note, which I will expand on slightly more after we've gone through this particular slide over here. Now, what knowledge has done has not just given Dantes his new desire to seek vengeance, but it has also turned him into a new man. Now, the chapter actually spent a bit of time actually changing the way they describe by describing how Dantes thinks and how he acts after having his knowledge with the Ave Faria. Now, um, The one thing that I also really, really like about the chapter is that it showcased to you how quickly we can actually forget the benefits that we have had. So what I mean by benefit here is this. Edmond has, at this point, Edmond has his education with the father career for about a year plus. Now, the Abbé career did not want to think of escape because it involves a method that he was not very keen on, to put it simply. I'm not going to talk that much about the what happened in chapter because I just wanted to focus on the theme about which is that the education and the knowledge that Edmond gets through his interaction with the Abbé Faria. So I'm very sorry if I did not give like a very quick summary of the chapter because I wasn't that was not the purpose for this video for now. So Edmond actually went like so sorry, so the father Faria was like, okay, you know what? We actually have like, there's a plan, but we cannot kill anyone. And that was the thing that he was very hesitant on because there was a guard outside of their cells, and Edmond was like, you know what, just kill him and just run. And the Abbe was adamant on not killing anyone. So after a year, the Abbe made Edmond promise don't harm the guard, and he kind of gave him a plan. Okay, so here's what we do. And Edmond kind of by reflex just said that, oh, but then that means we wasted a year. He kind of blurred that out without realizing that he actually has spent a year studying with the Abbe Faria. So it was as if like he's saying that his education didn't mean anything at that time. So he was very quick to apologize to it, but it actually shows us that do not lose sight of what you have gained during, even though you felt like you didn't do anything. It doesn't actually mean you didn't do anything, right? It actually means that you have, when something of a higher priority or something that is of greater importance to you shows in, don't neglect what you have already gotten. It's actually a blind spot in a way. So Edmond actually realized it that hence he was quite profuse in his sickness of in seeking forgiveness from the Abbey. And the Abbey kind of go like, haha, it's alright, don't worry about it. Another thing that I like that the book actually points out was that Edmond didn't just pick up knowledge from the Abbé, he picked up his mannerisms as well, which is actually very interesting, which is that when we have a teacher, very often we don't just learn the knowledge of the teacher, we actually learn the teacher itself. We study the individual, we mimic the individual. In a way, it is, to me, in my opinion, it is a hallmark of a good educator or a good teacher, which is that your students actually take up certain elements of your character because they possibly because they see the advantage in having it, which is great. Um, so it changed Edmond's character in that sense, which is that he is no longer that young, green, naive boy. He really, really now understands the world in a much better way because he's been educated by the Abbé, and he also now has some part of his mannerisms, right? And he becomes more calm is not the right word here. Is he becomes more composed. That's the word I'm looking for. More composed. He's more focused in a way because now at least he has a goal now, which is seek vengeance, right? So in a way, he's actually more focused as well. Now, here's the thing. There's also a curse when it comes to knowledge. Now, there's two curses over here. The first curse is that the Abbé actually could foretell that he was going to. Sorry, the Abbé actually foresaw that he was going to die. So the book actually also talks about the Abbé being sick, having a illness, and he actually will die. And he even explains to Edmond, I know that I will die because there's a blood clot in my brain and I'm half paralyzed. And the next time that happens, I will die. So it shows that knowing everything does not actually mean that you will, you know, is a great thing. You see too much, you see too clearly actually, in a way. Now, The second curse, which was what I mentioned, which I do not know why I accidentally deleted the line, which was that it corrupted Ammon, in which is that, okay, corrupt is actually a relatively strong word if you think about it, but I'm just gonna go with it first for now, which is that it gave him a sense of purpose, but this sense of purpose was not one of goodness, it was out of vengeance, right? Although it was, you cannot argue it was righteous vengeance, it was still vengeance. And it was something that demonstrates to us that, when you have knowledge and when you know, it can give you some very awful ideas or even some very awful motivations to do things and the will to do things as well. Now, the last slide for this video is actually on how Edmond as a character really did not change much even after he has received education from the FA. Frankly, to say that he did not change much is kind of wrong, because he did change. It's more like he kind of learned how to be selective with who he gives his love and attention to. Now, we see this when he was with the Abbé, which was that he demonstrated his loyalty again, which is what the hallmark of his character always, right? Even in the first few chapters, which is that he's always willing to see the good in people, and he's always willing to be loyal and to be dutiful and to be respectful, right? But it is as if the education kind of taught him to be selective with who he does this with. And slight spoiler alert, he actually exercises this throughout the whole book. For the people who he knows for a fact has given him love and care, he gives everything to them. But for the people who have wronged him, he just goes straight up full vengeance mode. So it is a very poignant lesson, which is that knowledge does not have to change who you are. It does not have to make you arrogant. It does not have to make you um, deceitful. It doesn't have to make you see things and the world any more different than it was originally the way you saw it. But it does allow you to know that this is the reality of the situation. This is the reality of the world. It gives you a better reading of the situation and how the world is. And from there, it allows you to actually accurately execute your morals and your principles despite knowing that the world is the way it is. And that's actually something that Edmond struggles with later on in the story as well. So that's it for today's video. I know it's relatively shorter than my previous ones. I'm planning to try to make their length slightly shorter or even segment the parts out so that it's easier for people to digest. And it's also easier for me to actually then expand on more concepts, because if I pile everything into one video, I just realized it's very difficult for me to get into depth for a lot of some of the more interesting details and nuances of maybe even the line that is spoken or even certain details that's mentioned in the book. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for listening, and I will continue with chapter 18 and 19 next week.